Human technology has been likened to Pandora's box for quite some time. As we learn more and more about the limitations of our own bodies, there has been one prevailing thought associated with it. Can we push past it? Our entire existence has been somewhat of an outlier. We're not the largest, we don't have the sharpest claws or the largest teeth, or really anything of the sort, but what we do have is a hyper-lethal level of intelligence and so much anxiety it's kind of hilarious. But we also have the ability to use it. This skill of thinking abstractly when it comes to all things has propelled our species at the hierarchy where really the only thing we have to worry about are other humans. This has always created a problem though. How do you deal with other beings as intelligent and aggressive as yourself? Because of this, technology has always been sought out that after we create it, there's always a bit of like a, oh shit, we probably shouldn't have done that moment. So in today's topic, it's really no different. In the events of the Gorge, a man from the United States and a woman from Russia are chosen to guard the rim of a gorge. Informed that they are required to keep anything from escaping, they assume it to just be the gates of hell. So in today's episode, what is down in the mist below, what keeps crawling out, and what could happen if they escape? Let's discuss that in today's episode, which I already said that twice. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Are you ready to take back your internet privacy today? If you are tired of companies aggregating your information and making money off of it, then go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke, or click the link below to take your personal data off the market. Every day, thousands of companies pull up a picture of you on a grainy computer screen as two brothers talk about trading this info. Info like your full name, email, home address, social security, phone number, and IP information, as well as many other pieces of information to boot. They can do this by buying the information off others who could have obtained it by nefarious means, such as let's say you signed up for a newsletter, they got hacked, they pull your email address and phone number. Or let's say you sign up for some big company and then they have a data breach, well, they have all of your info after that point. All of a sudden, you're getting calls, emails, and junk mail targeting you. Let Incogni do the dirty work for you. They track down who has your information and then formally request them to delete it, which is hilarious as that company had to pay for it to harass you in the first place, and now they are legally obligated to get rid of it. So if you are ready to take back your internet privacy, go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke, or click the link below to take your personal data off the market. All right, let's get back to it. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'm attempting to hit 1.25 million subs in 2025, so if you want to help towards that goal, that would be great. Also, without you guys, none of this would even be possible, so I do appreciate your support. Check out Roanoke Tales for cryptids and true crime stuff, basically anything I find interesting. And also check out Discord for movies where we watch them that end up here. I'm streaming on Twitch, Roanoke Games, and then those end up on YouTube called Roanoke Games because I'm very, very original. Links for everything in the description. We kick off our story with a woman waking up to some owls hooting. They tend to do that this time of year. As she writes off another day on the calendar, she brushes her teeth as she hears a plane approach. Looking out, it is landing at some sort of facility. She has evidently set up a shot for several days in the brush there, waiting for her mark to make its appearance. Taking aim in the distance, she is camouflaged quite well. As they lower the steps on the plane, the man steps out and is immediately domed. Nice shot. Across the planet, the man then wakes up extra sweaty. Wow, 4:22 a.m. Kind of sounds like me. You really do start sleeping less and less as you get older. My pineal gland. Grabbing his keys and getting into his car, he then heads towards a beach. Of course, it's dark, so who knows what's happening as he sits there. Taking in the sights and being in the pitch black, the sun then rises as he writes in his dream journal. Hopefully nobody ruins it and Mr. Electric has to get involved with some sort of chamber. A dog then shows up, as they tend to do, because, you know, if you're sitting there and if the dog is having a good life, it'll assume all humans are generally friendly. Getting some sniffs in and then goes back to its owner. He gets a text to head into work at Camp Pendleton shortly after that. Walking inside, this is not like bone cold at all. Seems everyone actually knows how to wear their fatigues correctly. This is crazy. Actually, I had the guy who created Bone Cold reach out to me in my comment section before. He mentioned how you could see the shirt on the Bone Cold monster. Hey, you work with what you got, brother. I wouldn't sweat it. The woman then asks if he knows who she is. It's the woman from Alien very clearly. He adds she must be some high-level spook, as then she talks about how his elite sniping skills are super elite, which you gotta love high-ranking government officials. She then asks if he's under any contracts at this current point in time. She continues on questioning why, if he's so talented, he was called unfit for service, which is why he's doing nothing with his life currently. She then asks about his social life, asking if he even has a girlfriend. She is basically just dunking on him the entire time. He says he drinks a little, but other than that, no ties to this world. so he's absolutely perfect. Also, just a word to the wise, if someone's asking you that stuff, they typically want to know if you have any connections that would come looking for you. You usually want to lie about that unless you really don't care at all. Because all good adventures start with not caring though, so there's that. Also, all bad adventures begin the same way too, so you just never really know. Results really do vary on that comment. So heading to Lithuania, the sniper from earlier then heads into a graveyard to see her old man, as I'm assuming they are at her mother's grave. She then talks about how her target had 4 offspring of his own, as he brings up that she was photographed in Belarus, so she got caught. Drasa laments having taken out this dude because of his offspring, as her dad brings up how he got rich off of landmines and selling arms. So how many other younglings lost their legs and faces? This appears to solve the situation somewhat, as she mentions she has to return to Moscow for a briefing, as the old man then talks about how he has cancer. His liver and his pancreas are screwed. He's going to take himself out on the 14th of February if he's even still alive at that point. So they have a beer, play a song, and say goodbye. He ends it by saying, "Look to the hunter in the sky on the 14th and light a candle for him. It is now September." As Sniper Extraordinaire rides a plane in a pretty bad turbulence, he then takes out his IV and wakes up. Another person then comes out of the front of the plane and she requests his left hand. He puts his watch, ID, and phone in the case and will not be getting them back. They can take him to the edge of the drop zone, but he has 38 clicks to walk after that. He asks where they even are, as she says she's not authorized to answer any of that. Jumping out of the back of the plane, his parachute fails to open and credits roll. Thanks for watching. Landing, he begins his walk out of there towards where he's supposed to be headed. If they gave him no information on the location or where he even is, how is he supposed to map there? Like, surely they must have given him some kind of semblance of the area he's in? Longitude and latitude lines, I'm guessing? Anyways, climbing mountains, camping, and existing in nature, it's nothing but pretty mountains and cold nights. I guess that's where the training comes in handy as far as navigating this. Approaching the gorge, ha, you said it! He sees something across the way as a man appears in the woods from the Royal Marines. He asks what they've told him about the mission. His name is Drake, as he says he's been there an entire year and still doesn't know exactly what their location is. However, he's pretty jazzed as his rotation ends at midnight and he can go back to living in the real world. Which, if they're taking everybody who doesn't have any ties at all, you're really just going back to the same situation, just a different flavor. So taking him to the observation post, he gives him the rundown. On the other side of the East Tower, which is strictly forbidden of making contact with, that is your counterpart. To the north and south of the gorge, there are landmines and razor wire. Basically, restock the ammo and the auto force multipliers, check the fences, and then check in every 30 days with a radio call. The gorge is invisible to spy satellites, and there is no outside communication. He mentions the stray dog protocol, and if it's ever triggered, you're supposed to just run like hell. The place is old, existing since World War II. The elected officials know nothing about the gorge, from the Soviet Union to all of the presidents of the United States. He then asks what the mission even is in the first place, as JD tells them he needs to stop what is in the gorge from coming out. Throwing something into the gorge and then it detonating, they begin hearing shrieking, as he's informed they call them the Hollow Men. Back in the 1940s, they sent 3 battalions of 2,400 men to clear it out, British, American, and Russian, just to kind of retake this area, and not one of them returned, so it became containment at that point. JD thinks the gorge is the entryway to hell, and their job is to stand guard at the gate, which I've always thought is like kind of, I don't know, the aesthetic of that is a cool thought, because it's like humanity in modern times, kind of like going against the supernatural forces of old times. Because, I mean, let's be real here. If you had to point to human technology and what would be considered like a godlike power, that is a nuclear weapon, because you're literally using the forces of the universe, splitting an atom to just make pure energy. It's crazy. Anyways, I always like that kind of thought process. Anyways, so Sniper Extraordinaire asks if Drake ever got lonely working on the weekends like usual, which he brings up a good point. If you are lonely alone, then the company is bad. JD then heads out the next morning, leaving Sniper Extraordinaire to kind of man his station for a year absolutely on his own. Eating some steak. It's gotta be really boring there to just hang out. Maybe the pay is good enough though. What do you do with your time? I reckon you get just like super ripped, but the dude's already ripped, so what do you really do with your time? Cleaning off a dish and leaving an alarming amount of soap on it, he then writes in his dream journal, drinks 3 fluid ounces of vodka, and then heads upstairs to go to sleep. Meanwhile, JD is finishing up his walk to the extraction point. As he drops a signal flare, the helicopter drops in a line and then pulls him up. They raise him up just high enough as JD confirms his identity, and then he gets taken out immediately. Yep, sounds about right. Alien gets confirmation that the rotation is complete, and I mean, it does make sense. You can't have any loose ends. It is now October. Sniper Extraordinaire, which is going to be his new name, but he'll get one again later because I actually learned his real name, goes and checks the dish to calibrate it as he walks along the fence line. Checking the auto turrets, everything looks good as he calls in for the radio check. They hang up on him, even though he's like, I have some questions. They're like, yeah, no, we don't want to answer them. It's like, all right, standard Gooberman activity. As then he goes to look at all the books available. Checking behind the bookshelf, there are many quotes written by people who have been here prior. All of them have likely shuffled off that mortal coil because they, got picked up by a helicopter. One is written by a man named Bradford, who was the first to be stationed there back after World War II. Picking some food in the garden, he then hears some machinery revving in the distance as he takes a look from his tower. Zooming in, wow, that is some insanely good zoom function. He then spots the other sniper who somehow knows she's being looked at. Waking up during a thunderstorm that night, it's 3 a.m., which is interesting. Why is that interesting? Because I also wake up at 3 a.m. a lot. But also it said that's when the veil between our world and the next is the thinnest. But the reality is if you really want to know why you wake up in the middle of the night, it's kind of ingrained in humanity. Basically, take winter, right? The sun goes down at 5:30. So when you had nothing to do besides look at a fire, odds are you're probably going to bed at 7, or at least sleeping in the cave at 7. So let's see, if you were to do, 7 to 7, that's 12 hours. And typically you only need about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So a lot of times people would actually wake up at 2, 3 in the morning, just kind of screw around for an hour, just doing whatever they wanted to do. Probably why they're so population explosions. And then they go back to sleep until they woke up because the sun got up. And it didn't get up, the sun rose, but you get what I'm saying. So it's kind of ingrained still, I think, in our species to just kind of be prepped to deal with nighttime that way. Anyways, looking around and clearing the tower, clearly Prometheus was having a bad dream. He also sliced up his foot. Pulling the glass out afterwards, he then cleans his wounds as he looks out the window. Seeing the other operative across the way, bummer, she's only got candles. East versus west, baby! It is now November. She lights a candle and sings in Lithuanian as she eats some cake, which I'm guessing is her birthday. As she looks out, she checks the, honestly, I don't even know what this thing is. Stationary binoculars, spotters, something like that. Anyhow, she uses whatever this thing is to look at him. Wow, they're totally in like with each other. She then fires a shot off after writing something as he looks through the spotter. She asks what his name is. Sniper extraordinaire, being a stickler for the rules, tells her to wait as he comes back saying they're not allowed to contact. What a nerd. They're gonna take you out anyways, so you might as well talk in the meantime, I suppose. Checking his spotter, she tells him her name and she says it's her birthday, so she's gonna do just whatever she wants. He then heads back inside as he pours a drink and he says his name is Levi. Like the jeans? Alright, right for parody. He says he can raise a drink to her as then they both get drunk on the job. Sounds like government. At this point, it becomes playing music and drinking. Wow, way more fun on the east side of the gorge than the west side. He says he's a terrible dancer. Can relate. He then says he's also a good shot, and she asks, how good of a shot? Bro, just hurdle your leg. It's one of the most impressive dance moves you can do, and it drives the ladies wild. Pulling a rifle, she takes a shot and shoots his vodka. As it becomes a fun game of everyone take pot shots at each other, general direction, I suppose. And remember, the first 3 rules of firearms are this. 1, have fun. 2, flex your skills. And 3, safety third. Seems like that could have gone horrifically wrong really fast. She then puts a bottle on her head as she stops as she sees something on the other side of the gorge. Probably a good thing that happened because if she got domed, I'm guessing that would cause an international incident. Checking the fence, she then looks down as she spots something climbing up. It's just Kratos or Dante or something. Thank God it's not the Doomslayers. That would herald in much more horrible things to come. Looking down, he now spots them making money moves on the walls. Taking a shot, the fence then gets breached as she opens up on them, trying to render aid over to him. Hundreds are making a run on the wall, so I'm guessing it's not all flirting across a ravine and drinking, is it? So as the rustling noise continues, Dasha also looks down, hearing something coming up on her wall. Stepping back, one of the creatures has made its way all the way up the tower. As she looks up, she then pulls a handheld, doming it. Sending it back down, but others are climbing up. Sniper extraordinaire then takes his shots, doming several as a mine then gets detonated. He raises the MG and then starts tearing them apart as they both fire on the opposing side. The auto turrets finally get activated as the gorge then gets lit up. Why these aren't just automatically set in place for where they are makes no sense. Drossel was injured in the process, but the mine exploding didn't completely take her out, so I'm sure that won't become some horrific infection in the future. But now that we have seen these for a moment, let's do a quick rundown based on what we have seen, because we are not going to be seeing anything for a while after this, apart from just flirting and making moves on foreign operatives, which I hear is frowned upon. The creatures that come up, and that will continue to come up, appear to be covered in some sort of growth. They are humanoid and evidently bipedal, however, However, we really only see them climbing. We can surmise that they are experienced in scaling walls, and based on the hand that comes down later, they do have sharp claws. They have 4 fingers and 1 thumb, indicating that they are in fact primates of some sort, and in fact their whole body structure appears to be that of a human, but the growths kind of show that you can see all the way through their heads, bringing into question, are these just mimics of humans or are these actual humans? This will be shown in greater detail later, but for now, they appear to be human somewhat, or something that's good at pretending to be human. Sniper Extraordinaire then stays scanning the gorge wall for the rest of the night as Dasha cleans her wounds. He checks on her as she crawls over to the other wall and then grabs the paper writing best birthday ever. Now that it is fully morning, he then heads over to the fence to replace the mines and fix it. Careful, SpongeBob. Hearing shrieking in the distance, he then checks on Dasha, who's already watching him. As he does, something then comes up out of the gorge, a piece of tech that doesn't appear like what we have in this day and age. The auto turret then moves in response as it flies off with Sniper Extraordinaire, having no idea what that even was. Of course, given that the auto turret didn't light it up, it implies that it must have clearance of some kind. It is now December. Distilling his own vodka, he fills his canteen that I'm pretty sure has a hole in it, right? I guess he just JB welded it. Dasha, you're not supposed to JB weld anything you drink from, by the way. I think that causes like super cancer. Dasha then drinks over yonder, somehow not having an infection that completely takes her out, and she plays Silent Night, given that it's almost Christmas, which naturally it's snowing, and naturally I'm jealous of. She then looks out and spots a tree having been decorated as he wrote Merry Christmas, Drassa. Then we get a montage of drinking and then making snowmen with each other's names, much like a Dawn of the Dead sort of deal. They play chess across the way, which, quick question, why not just nuke the gorge? Well, that'll be explained later. When I write these things, I have questions that I write, and then I come back the following day, and I always answer my own questions. Fast forwarding, it is now February. Christmas is over, Sniper Extraordinaire. He wakes up hearing a shriek as the doors to his tower were just left open. I have no idea. Walking outside, brother, it is cold. Why would you leave these ajar even? Closing them, he then looks out as she's already watching him, because apparently nobody sleeps near the gorge. So they both put a hand on the glass because they are feeling it, Mr. Krabs, as one does, as then he walks the lines the next day looking for any issues. He keeps writing in his dream journal, "Dear diary, I had that dream again. Need to figure out what the bear with balloon hands means." And I write that because actually when I wrote this, I had a dream about that the other night. Weird. Fast forwarding once more, I'm guessing it's February 14th as she sits there and cries, lighting a candle for her dad. He says he missed her on patrol and then asks what's wrong. She says she wishes he could be there as it's been a hard day. Bro, just cross the gorge. It's easy mode. All you gotta do is avoid the auto turrets, the landmines, the razor wire, whatever super fun thing they have planted in the gorge preventing you from crossing over in the first place, the hollow men. Basically, the auto turrets on the other side, you're fine. So ignoring that like Leon Kennedy levels with Ashley, he then heads to bed and then reads the quotes, getting inspiration to risk it for the biscuit. Taking an RPG, then pulls out the detonating part, which is kind of important, as then he starts setting up the lines. This man is crazy. Of course, 6 months on your own will start making you do crazy things and getting pretty creative. So she sees that he has an RPG as he goes to fire it, and as it gets caught in a tree on the other side, she jumps up to put out the fire that is currently burning down the forest. Like, it'd be hilarious if after all this, like, he comes over and he just has like a really high-pitched voice and she immediately is not about him anymore. Like, at least you could go back to your side of the gorge and pretend like this never happened. Also, we will be getting to the science here shortly. I know, it's like an hour into this movie before we even get a hint as to what these things are, so just bear with me. So he asks her if she wants to have dinner tonight because he's a gentleman, as then he gets rid of his beard. Brother, that was the selling point. Beards to men are like makeup to women. Of course, you gotta grow it correctly and trim it, otherwise it just turns into a giant neck beard, which is not the most ideal situation. He then grabs some flowers as he gets ready to ride the fresh gnar that he created all the way over to the other side of the gorge. Running and jumping, he didn't calculate for the slack in the line, as now he has to climb his way across. The shrieking can be heard from below because those things can see him. Having reached the other side, brother might need to take a shower after all that. She comes around the corner as he talks to her. She says they are cloaked, so who's watching? She made rabbit pie for him, sounds good enough, and he brought her flowers. She then tells him, "You smell terribly," and then tells him to go take a shower, as naturally we get the shower scene. It had to be this way. She also took all of his clothes, and it's only probably late February. I mean, it's funny to do that, like, you know, if you're skinny dipping in July, but when you're showering in late February, it's cold, and you're probably not representing too well. So they eat dinner as they try to figure out where they even are. He says they must be in the northern hemisphere, because when he had left the US, it was fall, and when he got here, it was still fall. She then asks him about the longest shot he's ever made, 3,240 meters, which in the Lord's units is 10,629 feet or 2.01 miles, possibly an even better measurement, 3,543 bald eagles. And that is bald eagle height, not wingtip to wingtip. He's in the top 5 of bald eagle height shots. Then she brings up a certain shot that was 4,155 bald eagle heights, as then he denies it. That's like 3,800 meters, which was also a good call being humble because that was actually her shot, and she was testing to see if he was going to be a turbo douche about it. He says the view is much better over on this side of the gorge than on his, as he asks what's the truth about this place and the hollowmen down in the gorge. She talks about how her father was KGB and how he would tell her she doesn't want to know the truth. Too much truth of the matter makes your heart depressed and your mind insane. So the whole date is just them talking about sniping, which is what I imagine snipers do on dates. Like, it's kind of like pilots on dates talking about flying, or garbage men on dates talking about garbage. I don't know, so it tracks. But being that it's a courting process and they've been talking for months, we all know what happens from here. After the assumed event, she then tells him about her old man and how she's looking to the hunter in the sky knowing that he's already in it. Mr. Sensitive then talks about how he writes poems, so he's handsome, has abs, talented, and writes poems. Dude's like hitting all the high points here for one of those novels that people read, and I don't really understand. It's basically you're just reading internet stuff. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So she asks for a terrible poem as he says, I'm not going to recite it. She then says, well, you have to tell me now that you've actually mentioned it, as he says, I just started and it's a working title. It's called She Collapsed at Night. It is now the next morning and he has to head back. He loved the rabbit pie, which I'm sure is a euphemism, as then he heads back out to begin his climb to his tower once more. And as he does, he hears an explosion below as one of the creatures has begun climbing. He then starts falling into the gorge as the line snaps. Finally, something is happening. She grabs her chute and then jumps in after him, landing in a river, perhaps even the river Styx. She gets caught for a moment on her chute as then she reemerges. Grabbing a tree, she stops herself as she goes to climb out. Bootcut is not having a great time on his side, having landed in a tree that begins to move. That cannot be good. These creatures are everywhere, with one in particular taking interest in him. He then pulls his handheld and fires at it, dropping from his chute, getting stuck at the base of the meaty tree. As it begins to engulf him, at least it's not a whomping willow, which starts whomping him, I suppose. Holding him down though, Drasta then shows up, breaking the trap as she then goes to grab him. He's like, don't come near me. It's some sort of adhesive. Do not touch this stuff. Cutting free, they then head to the east wall to find the cable. Creatures begin their attack in what appears to be like they're riding horses, which stabbing them still works, although so do headshots. One gets its leg stuck under a horse as it starts freaking out, as Slim Straight here then just straight domes it. Examining it, he thinks they probably want them for food purposes as they look pretty emaciated. They also realize that they do not have the ascender as it's like way back in the water somewhere, and it's like 500 meters up to the top, which is like 1,500 feet or so. So they're pretty much stuck. So now that we've seen a little bit more about these creatures, let's discuss them for a moment. This is not some trick of mimicry, because with the horses having been changed into these tree-like creatures as well, that would mean these creatures riding them at one point were very likely human. Other animals are able to be changed into these things as well, and because of this, this entire gorge appears to be contaminated with something, but the question becomes, is it natural, man-made, or something not even from here in the first place? It's really hard to tell at this point, as when we look at these creatures, they all appear to be the same conglomeration. Because they do not have the ascender, they then guess that if they follow the river south, they might be able to get out. Checking the dome dude, they then find the uniforms on the guys are from the 1940s. They are the Lost Battalions. So confirmed, these were definitely pure humans at one point in time and subsequently have been changed into these tree people, I guess. The ants or whatever. So as they keep walking, some of the area is yellow and some of the area is purple. And continuing on, human skeletons have been fused with trees into horrific amalgamations. Well, whatever it is causing this is not really good for your life expectancy. However, this does give us an idea as to what is happening. So as we look at the skeletons fused with the tree, this would show that this is essentially some sort of breakdown between the structures of the bodies and of different creatures. When we look at plants versus animals, there are clearly differences between the two. Plants came about first, and as a result of the environment that led them to here and their evolution, they developed things like cell walls to give structure to their cells and prevent a greater loss of water, and in general, this is to protect themselves. This keeps plants relatively rigid, and even when dehydrated, they're still kind of similar in size to how they are in general. Of course, they can wilt, but I'm thinking more specifically like the trees around here. Animal cells do not have cell walls, and as a result, we are generally squishier, but we're much more mobile. Now, the thing is, these two cell types do not exist together. Body structure and keeping the somatic cells themselves, like as themselves is incredibly important to a body. The reason is you wouldn't want tree spores drifting into the body and then the body fueling another organism to keep it alive, because that is essentially parasitic at that point. As a result, the body of animals have developed a way to keep the body purely one organism, or at least mostly one organism. Now, obviously the kind of, I guess, caveat to that statement is you're actually more bacteria than human. So it is what it is. But basically, you might be asking, well, how does the body do this? And I'm glad you asked that question. You're real smart. The major histocompatibility, and that sounded sarcastic, but it wasn't. The major histocompatibility complex are integral to identifying whether a cell should be there or not. This complex functions by presenting a small protein fragment on the surface of the cell known as a peptide that then tells the immune system, yo, I'm supposed to be here. Let me show you my credentials. So the immune cell doesn't just outright attack that cell. If another cell is present, say if you get like a splinter, the body will actually attack that in order to try to remove it. Still though, your body doesn't fuse with foreign cells. In order for this to work, several things would need to happen on a genetic level concerning animals that weakens our immune system's resolve and increases a plant's regenerative cells on an aggressive level, which we'll actually talk about here in a moment because all of this is going to make sense. So as they keep walking, they then find a structure that appears to be a gate that opens up into a town. The British, Soviets, and Americans held this area at one point in time, and they had enough of a presence there to put up churches and a movie theater. They begin hearing screeching as then they head towards the church and shut the front door. Looking at the altar, there are still bodies sitting in the pews, and then checking one of the bodies, they all took cyanide in order to take themselves out in their own time frame. Which also, if you would like to know how cyanide works, because a lot of people don't, cyanide works by actually binding to an enzyme called cytochrome oxidase within the mitochondria of the cells that you have, which mitochondria obviously is the powerhouse of the cell. This effectively prevents the cells from utilizing oxygen and producing energy known as ATP or adenosine triphosphate, which ultimately leads to the rapid death, particularly affecting organs highly dependent on oxygen like the brain and heart. Essentially, cyanide poisons the body's ability to use oxygen at a cellular level, causing rapid systemic failure. It basically chokes your cells out on a cellular level because it has far-reaching consequences to the functionality of your body, preventing you from using any oxygen, so you just kind of pass out, then your heart stops and your brain dies. So with that discussion done, don't ever try to take some of that crap. Rat poison has it in it. Don't touch it. So Dasha then says this place is evil. Agreed, or possibly just infected. It just depends on how you look at it. It actually doesn't. It's definitely infected. So as they keep walking around the church, they begin hearing chittering, which is, that's never good. Looking up, they then spot, they're in the trees, man, or at least the ceiling, shining a light on them. Oh, sweet Jesus, these things are literally scatulas. It then drops down on her as they open up on these, good God, how horrifying. Time to leave that church. This is like a Resident Evil movie if it was actually good. The other creatures then burst in, beginning their attacks as they light them up, but they're pretty hard to kill. It now becomes a fight for survival as Dasha noob tubes the wall. They run out of there hearing roaring and shrieking. Finding the gorge wall, they then see a door and having really no other option, they get it closed and barricade it. As they move to the back of the wall, they end up finding a lab with a ton of equipment. And as they walk, they find one guy who had his fingers grow and his head is apparently missing. Of course, your head does fall off naturally if you just sit there long enough because it'll desiccate and the connections will just kind of snap. So it's not really that strange, I suppose. Others were at their workstation and just kind of drop, but their spines appear way too long. And then finding one holding onto a film called God Forgive Us. That's a classic. You know, the thing is though, he tends to do that if you do ask, but you're probably still screwed on a physical plane of existence. They then find a backup generator as they get the lab lights turned on. Putting the film into the projector, let's see what God's supposed to forgive. A woman is talking about how the community formed a coalition between the East and the West. They were developing biochemical weapons, basically working in conjunction with the nuclear bombs to see who would create the thing first. Her side then hurts her as she continues talking. An earthquake had apparently hit that was 8.2 magnitude, which is pretty bad. This would go on to release the toxin that they were working on, and it merges with the DNA of the plants and animals as well as all the insects in the area, which is included in the animals, but whatever. Some were more resistant to infection, but begin to present within 5 days. She says the gorge luckily will prevent it from spreading, but and hey guys, why not just nuke the place? Also, if their exposure is limited to just a few hours, you'll allegedly be fine. However, if it's a few days, then you are totally screwed. Then find evidence of stuff from the late 2000s, meaning somebody's been down there just recently, and they evidently haven't bombed the gorge as they are still trying to study it. They're not really working for the military, or at least they weren't employed by the military. They're actually working for a paramilitary organization. That's always a classic. The drones are collecting hybrid DNA samples, and apparently they're trying to create super soldiers. They were sent here to protect the secrets. So finding the stray dog file, it contains pictures vectors of an atomic weapon set to blow the whole area if the dishes are ever exploded, which I wonder if they will be, but they need to make it at least 4.2 kilometers from the blast site though. Relaxed Fit then tells Dasha it was worth it if the whole world ends and he got to know her. Now that Old Navy and Dasha become aware that these things can actually think tactically and are not just animals, Straight Fit then says they are playing with them as they can't see. Popping smoke, the creatures now can't see either, so it kind of levels out the playing field, sort of. So now we have a good idea as to what is happening. Let's actually discuss how this toxin works and why they become what they are, as it will begin to make a lot more sense. This toxin, as it is stated later, is a biological weapon for all intents and purposes, but we have to figure out by what metric it operates in, and I think I understand the process of what they were going for. So for this, we need to first establish, if you were to create one of these, what is going to be the best way to deploy it? If we look at all the options available, at least vectors, bacteria could be too easily destroyed by antibiotics and typically will just produce toxin rather than screwing with the genetic profile of an individual, so that's out. Parasites are also out because they just sort of they don't spread quickly enough for that to be really a viable vector or as a method for delivery. Mold spores are likely also not the answer either, as breathing apparatus could easily be used to prevent really any issue whatsoever. So we have to assume that the vector is going to be viral in nature. So as we have seen since the beginning of 2020, viruses can get out of hand really quickly, and their ability to spread through the population is unrivaled due to the close nature of humans and our social ability. So odds are these scientists were down here working with a virus of sorts. Now, what did the virus do to create this? Well, it is unknown exactly how far the experimentation worked, but it's clear specific enzymes would have been messed with concerning our genetic level. Focusing on humans for a moment, because we're human, in our genetic profiles, we have many different proofreading elements, such as DNA polymerase, whose job is to look for mistakes and issues in our genes that aren't supposed to be there. And it does a pretty good job. I think it's said to be 99.9% effective, but there are still quite a few flaws, and it does miss a lot because it has to continually check your DNA. Another enzyme of interest is DNA ligase. This enzyme helps actively incorporate foreign DNA into our cells. It will essentially seal the foreign DNA into a cell by adjoining the sticky ends of a cut gene. This is how retroviruses actually implant to our own genomes, such as HIV. So then what happened? It's clear the virus infects every form of life. While plants do have a form of immune system, it was able to easily sidestep that. With animals, it's likely our immune systems would activate in order to combat the virus, but as it infected cells, it's clear a critical part of the immune system was not tripped, and this was alarmingly easy to do. Now, this is possibly why you can exist within this area for a couple of hours, because you do not receive the viral load that you need to actually be infected. But as you continue breathing this in, eventually your body will be overwhelmed. So the first line, and I mean the absolute first line when you get infected with a virus, is for the cells infected to yell for help. Also, I guess macrophages could stumble across the virus and be like, yo, what is this doing here? And that can also sound the alarm, but this ends up taking them out, like at least concerning the infected cells. They call for help and that destroys them, but it's for the greater good. Interferons would release from the infected cell, which signals to the immune system that the cell is currently contaminated with a virus and needs to be destroyed to prevent more viruses from being created. However, we saw something rather alarming in South America in 2020. One man had a mutation of that virus that we all know, and it actually cut his interferon production by 99%. The virus was actively blocking this protein from escaping, and as a result, his body never knew he was even infected in the first place. He presented no symptoms until the virus got so totally out of control, he dropped out of nowhere because his body wasn't even aware he was infected. Now, as you might know, that did not become the one that spread, like that version of it, because it was so just perfect at kind of ending a person that it didn't have a chance to really spread to anybody else. Those are the type of viruses that's like, oh God. So because of this, I would have to assume then that the Gorge virus, the genes responsible for interferon production known as IFNB1, IFNA1, and a few other IFN genes, would have their gene expression either outright prevented or the genes themselves would be destroyed. As a result, the virus could spread quickly and quietly with nobody any wiser, as symptoms would not really inspire anyone to seek help, as there would not be any symptoms until it was too late. But this has other effects as well. Due to a virus's natural ability to sometimes pick up foreign DNA from other infected hosts, we need to remember that this virus is not connected to just one type of species, but instead everything is on the table, all life. This would mean either there is one receptor that was found that the virus could actually attach to across all forms of life and then invade the cell, or the virus can actively change its configuration concerning the proteins on its capsids to attach to any cell and then invade it, or possibly it just straight up spears cells. If that's it, then ooh, God. But that would be, all of those are a little disturbing. Of course, this whole thing is really like, as the infections progress, many would not know that they were infected, and all the while the viruses would actually be passing back and forth between humans, plants, and insects, implanting more and more of the DNA due to ligase likely being hijacked through human meddling with a virus, priming it to be more active. Over time, it might even actually be just implanting another gene to essentially mimic something like ligase that then will just implant more genes over time. But this would cause quite a lot of the DNA from other animals to build up fast. But at first, it's likely not really to cause too much of an issue. But eventually, as time went on, more and more of the DNA is added to the human genome. And this is why in a few hours, if you escape, your body can actually have a chance to fix the issue due to like the actual polymerase action kind of working on it. But if you stay long enough, however, you become more of a genetic soup. And then the problem is that your body is still undergoing mitosis. So any daughter cells created during this time, your body is not going to know that those daughter cells are not genetically just totally screwed. And then at that point, you don't really have anything to go back to. So as you move into a few days, this process is mostly complete and then symptoms will begin to appear. And at this point, other comorbidities, as you can tell, can start to present themselves for several reasons. If you stood alone, the genetic profile that you have now is still contaminated. However, your standard body structure would still somewhat be there. And this is mostly what we see in the town with those who live there, which is mostly just, I guess, the battalion members at this point. They were infected after the fact in a different area, so they didn't exist in the same locations. Instead, they just slowly turned. Obviously, they would still be infected by plant and animal, or at least insect DNA. During the initial outbreak, though, those that were in town, family members of the scientists sent there, likely fled away from the area, and this led them into the woods. As they changed, eventually they would stop moving because obviously once you start to develop cell walls in your actual cells themselves, that's a problem. They would become fused with the trees for several reasons, but the main one being the cambium that are actively dividing cells near the surface in specifically plants. And this is actually why you can graft one type of tree branch to another type of tree. The cambium layer will actually fuse the cells together. In these humans, due to their infection, their immune system would actually be wrecked, but they also would be part tree, as hilarious as that sounds. Greg, put a picture of that tree meme up with the weird, like, hyper-realistic face. That is basically what you become. The cambium layer would usually be thwarted because you move and because of how your immune system operates, but seeing as both of those are out the window, these families would begin to fuse with the trees, creating this horrific forest. We will see what happens to the scientists also. They essentially become a conglomeration as well, and they are still infected by plant and insect DNA like everybody else, so they fuse with each other as genetic profiles are shared from individual to individual. The plant DNA also creates the branching structures from their body, or at least the drive to do so, by contaminating the genetics as human DNA continues to cause the animal cells to divide and exist with one another, creating one giant creature that is very clearly neurologically connected to each other. When one wakes up, they all wake up. When one breathes, they all breathe. Interestingly though, due to the plant cells forming, this also makes them highly flammable, but we will see that in a moment. Making their way through, they then find a rope as Drasa falls directly into a trap as she gets dragged by one of the tribrids, because there's just more than two genetic profiles at work here, so I wouldn't call it a hybrid. It should also be noted before moving on that these creatures that used to be the battalion are still somewhat intelligent, but their minds have been corrupted. Neurologically, they are not operating at the level of human anymore, but still incredibly close to it. The area has now turned into red as she opens up on the creature as she gets knocked out by a rock, which lucky that didn't cave in your face. Sniper Extraordinaire then starts making his way into the red PvP zone as then he spots something across the way. Seeing a vent, and then heads down into the earth as he calls out to Drasa, seeing light below. Well, time to head down into the Silent Hill, brother. Amongst a pile of skeletons and skulls, Drasa is hung up as the creature approaches her. It's human somewhat, but definitely plant-like. He then grabs a twig in her side and twists it, and she wakes up yelling, as that wouldn't have been fun, as then it walks over to the fire it has. She kicks at the creature as then she tackles it and grabs a knife before going prison shiv style on it. Fighting in the arena, she's then able to get in some stabs as it pulls its sword, as then she throws the shiv at it, but this thing is not going down, and it's just going absolutely ham trying to cut her head off. Again, it's part plant, so its entire physiology has been altered to the point that it likely doesn't bleed anymore like humans bleed. This would mean that the standard damage doesn't work. However, the brain is still in control at least somewhat, so if you dome it correctly, it will put it down for good. Because it's part plant, she's able to light it on fire as low-rise genes then shows up, taking it out permanently. The creature was Bradford. He was the first soldier in the West Tower who evidently went down here and got infected. It's likely he was sent, given not much knowledge or really not anything known at this point, and then Dasha asks asks where they even are because she was knocked out the whole ride here, which makes sense. They're just kind of hanging out in a chemical missile facility. Joy abound. Heading out of the doors, well, this looks horrible. The earthquake damaged everything, and the missiles have started leaking. The contaminant is in the fog. As they look down, they see people stuck in the vines of this thing, which that's a horrible way to go. Walking through, they're all breathing, as I wouldn't be touching any of that. Big contamination issue. Finding one guy in particular blocking the path, they then move past them as they spot the stairs in the distance. Tripping, she then runs into one of these creatures as she gets grabbed as roots and vines start reaching out because everyone has woken up. Way to go! Cutting their way through, Dasha noob tubes the vines as well, and then they start shrieking because it's horrific because they're on fire and they're still somewhat human. And then heading back to the surface, they find an old Jeep that they can take out of there. You see, old Jeeps have powerful winches that'll work just like an auto ascender. But, I mean, this was back when Jeep was actually good. If it was a modern Jeep, I would not depend on that thing to do more than anything than just, I don't know, explode as soon as I tried to start it up. So starting their road trip out of there, and then pass through the blue zones, seeing the nuke in the distance. Entering the yellow zone, they then move through the forest, as then they find the zip line on the eastern wall. Attaching the line to the actual winch on the Jeep, the creatures from the forest start making money moves on them, but Dasha is out of ammo. Starting the winch, the Jeep then starts getting pulled up, which how strong was that line? Ascending out of there, I mean, it is actually working, which I guess is surprising, but it's not really that surprising. I've actually seen old footage of Jeeps literally being pulled up walls. Like these are like World War II Jeeps. Again, not modern Jeeps. So as the creatures start using the line to climb as well, they grab onto boyfriend Jeans here as he gets one of them off of him before he starts force enhancing the other creatures because he's out of ammo as well. An on-rails mission starts with one objective: keep him off the Jeep, as boyfriend Jeans then cuts the propane canister and lights the creatures on fire as all of them are burnt and the Jeep gets semi-detonated. Levi then hurts his arm in the process as they go to cut the rope, and seeing as they are near the top, it's not too big of a deal as the Jeep then falls to the bottom and explodes. So getting back to the towers, they wrap their wounds as they say they need to quarantine. They discuss the prospect of being infected. Yeah, that would basically be concerning to me as well, as then they drink and raise a toast to making it alive, as he says he was chosen for the job because he's expendable, and now he has all of the reasons to live. She says, well, we could run. She knows the perfect place in France, which that's a lie. There is no perfect place in France, as he says they can't just leave. He says they need to destroy the Gorge, so now they just need to wait until 6 days as the mutations will appear otherwise. So hopefully they aren't infected, as that would absolutely blow waiting to see if that just kind of shows up. So later on, calling in for his radio check, Alien asks if Flare Pants here went into the Gorge. She says the private sector is where most of the important work is done, as he informs her she is not government. The aim of her research is to make American ground forces unbeatable by creating super soldiers. I mean, I get this genetic research would be helpful, but so far it just seems to make a genetic soup. The alien then asks if Crop Jeans has noticed any movement from his eastern counterpart. Alien then says he must neutralize his counterpart, and he tells her consider it done. Alien then calls the commander saying he is compromised because lo and behold, the people who told you this was completely isolated aren't trustworthy, and they put cameras everywhere. So heading along the gorge, then watch one another setting lines. As they do, they say they love each other as a helicopter begins making its approach. Distressed Jeans then tells her to run as they both go to nope out of there. A team gets out along with Alien as he starts moving through the woods with both of them running in opposite directions. Why was it important for Alien to show up when they were just going to take him out? I have no idea. It really seems dumb to, send your top level people into this area. So reading Levi's dream journal, a soldier then asks what if Athletic Fit decided to run? Rallying the quadcopters, which is a massively lame name for these things, they're continuing to run out of range as the quadcopters start firing on him, having spotted his location. And what are the odds that they would have chosen this line of flight to go with and then find him? Seeing as they are 3.6 kilometers out, they can now detonate absolutely nothing yet, as then he is turned into ripped jeans and gets hit by one round in the leg. He only made it about 3.8 kilometers or 2.36 miles in the correct units, as Dasha then starts firing on the quadcopter, which she takes out too, which is almost a hat trick. Taking a pot shot at another, Low Rise then nails it, as he is out in the open though. With both ascending opposite hills, they then set up their sniping positions. And let me guess, someone's going to have to make some crazy crack shot from a massive distance. Okay, turns out I was wrong. Classic. Alien then sees something on the wall, and instead of looking at it herself, she's like, what is that on the wall? It's like, why don't you go check? So walking over, Dasha then is taking aim at her, but she stops and looks at the dish. Drop crotch jeans here wrote 3 things cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth, quoted from Buddha. Firing at the dishes, they detonate both of them, igniting lines that then blow the rest of the dishes, exposing the gorge from cover. With their cover destroyed, the gorge is exposed, and as a result of saying that twice, Stray Dog is activated as they have 2 minutes to get out of there. As they run up the hill, Alien and her team get in the helicopter to take off and escape. Having made it the 4.2 miles, the nuke then drops as Alien screams about needing distance, not altitude. See, had you told the pilot as you were getting in, he may have been able to acquiesce that request, but the problem is you didn't tell him what the issue was and that you only had a minute and a half. And according to a Google search I did, a helicopter can typically go about 3 to 5 miles inside of a minute and a half. That was at 3.6 miles as a 5K. You would have made it. But that was on you, Alien. So watching from afar, the gorge is destroyed as the helicopter doesn't make it far enough due to the EMP blast effect that a nuke has, and it's brought down with everyone taken out. Torn Fit still gets hit by the blast wave due to his injury though. He just sort of drops into the water and he just straight up sinks to the bottom as Dasha then carves stuff into a cave wall, beginning her quarantine. After 5 days, Dasha comes out having not turned into a tree monster, as then she heads to France, which arguably is I think that's personally a worse fate, but she's heading to the meeting point where boyfriend's genes is supposed to be at. Waiting around the whole day, it's beginning to look like Prometheus didn't make it. He gave her a letter that if he didn't make it by sunset, she was to open it. It was his poem. So she reads it and has a nice cry, as one does because you nuked your potential boyfriend. Happens to the best of us. The sun then sets and it is now April. Cutting lemons at a bar somewhere, they're speaking French, so probably in France, she then spots him in all black, in the sun, burning alive. He says he will have the rabbit pie. You see, it's a euphemism. Standing in the shade, she then tells him he's late. So they make out as one does, as allegedly all lines are severed. I'm assuming that the people from Darklake just kind of think they both died in the blast, and I mean, that's the only thing I can figure. And thus concludes the gorge. Of course, here's the problem. They knew they were going out there to neutralize them, and then just randomly the nukes drop. That would have obviously seemed like he did that. So I kind of feel like they should probably think he's alive. So this contaminant was clearly viral in nature. Its ability to move through the population with the speed that it did and affect people on a genetic level means that to some degree there must have been some genetic tampering with the virus itself, leading to viral contamination amongst genomes. Now the problem is, if this ever escaped, it can infect any type of life. But without the fog actually being there, I don't really see it being that much of an issue, because as soon as it was identified, you could probably deal with this. But anyways, because of the genome contamination, this in turn would cause not only the growths to form as new somatic cells with new information begin dividing in the human body, but also for these growths to overtake the individual and decrease the level of reasoning that a human naturally has, which we have a lot depending on who you ask. It also led to a crossover event, such as growths from one organism to now be viable at breaching into another organism. And this would lead to people being fused to trees and down in the missile location fused together, as the main biomass there were other humans. Ultimately, would God forgive you? Probably, but that 9 megaton B-53 nuclear bomb doesn't. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. Do you think this was an eradication event or something else? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, as it helps get the video out there, and subscribing helps me get towards those goals. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Games link in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And to my scientists, Dakota23 and Victus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan Stutz, and the victorious return of Chad the Enjoyer of scientific explanations of B-grade horror movies. I do appreciate y'all's support as well. And the rest of my patrons, you guys are super cool. It keeps everything running smoothly. It's never expected, but greatly appreciated, so thank you. All right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.